Hello, my name is Andrei Yeliseyev. I'm a researcher and analytical journalist from Belarus. Today we are pleased to have Rebecca Harms. She's a German politician, member of the European Parliament since 2004, co-chair of the Greens in the Parliament. Rebecca is a vocal critic of two bad things. One is nuclear energy and second is Mr. Putin. Last year, she has been added to the sanctions list of prominent EU people who are banned from entering Russia. So the format of our talk is the following. First, Rebecca will give a short intro, and then I will do a modest moderation of public interview. I will ask a couple of questions myself, and then you will be given an opportunity to ask Rebecca any questions on the EU's policy in the Eastern neighborhood. And Rebecca is a member of the EU delegation to the EU Ukraine and parliamentary committee, and also a substitute member to the committee with Russia, right? Okay, please.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody here in Lviv. I'm very happy that finally I could make it. I had received the invitation to this university, and especially also to this event with young journalists. I have received it several times, and it's the first time I could accept it. You gave me to answer a very difficult question. It sounds easy, but I can also give an easy answer. But behind the easy answer, I think we all together will find challenges which we have to tackle together from the EU side and from the side of the countries in the east of the European Union, so in the eastern neighborhood, as we call it. So you asked me to answer the question whether the European Union needs Georgia, Moldova and Ukraine. And the easy answer is yes, so I'm convinced that we need democratic and stable countries in our neighborhood. I'm also convinced that the countries mentioned, and not only those three countries, but all the European countries, should have systems based on freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. The big question is how to achieve this. And I said when I had the short meeting now to prepare this session, I said already I'm a bit familiar with Moldova. I visited Moldova recently. I spent 2 days in Chisinau. It's a shame I have never been to Georgia. Maybe it's because of Ukraine, and Ukraine really required a lot of my time during the last years. But I'm really not an expert on Georgia. I'm reading the reports, the progress reports. I'm discussing with my colleagues who are working on Georgia. The country I know best in the eastern neighborhood is clearly Ukraine. I'm visiting Ukraine since 1988, so I'm visiting Ukraine since the time before this country existed, and my judgment on Ukraine is probably much more honest and experience-based than my judgment on Moldova and especially on Georgia. So all the three countries are the countries of association agreements and also including trade agreements with the European Union. And so this is, I would say, a very good decision for the European Union and for those countries. but nevertheless, having the association agreement is not a step which is self-fulfilling for the target we together are joining, making those countries part of the European family of nations. In all the three countries, I would say we have some major problems in common. And beyond those countries, I would say in all those countries coming from former Soviet Union, the transformation to countries, states based on rule of law, freedom and democracy, in all those countries coming from the Soviet Union, we have more or less the same problems to a different extent, in different dimensions, but it's not really easy, this process of transformation from the old times to the new times. It's even for those countries being already part of the European Union and coming from the group of states in former years known as the Warsaw Pact states. Even in those countries, when I think, for example, about Hungary, when I think about Bulgaria or Romania, or even about recent developments in Czech Republic or in Poland, you can see that it's still, even being member state of the European Union, it's not self-fulfilling, this process into a real functioning democratic system and into a good situation with a so reliable rule of law in place. Having said that, I think on the real problems, so in this transformation process, so the fights to achieve reliable political structures, independent institutions, overcoming so deeply rooted corruption, overcoming this very, very problematic oligarch system, which is, from my point of view, the major burden, or one of the major burdens in this transformation process, overcoming all this and the problems you are facing in the three countries. I think you are familiar with this. I will not in the introduction talk to you about the problems you are facing in your societies. I would prefer to do this in the session and based also on precise questions, especially since I know that during the last weeks you have been in Ukraine already, and this discussion on the disappointing development with the new government and also the president and his office, the disappointment, so it's something you know, and I must not explain this to you coming right now from Brussels. The only thing I can tell you is, yes, we are in a problem, and the European Union and the government of Ukraine. Same is, to my opinion, with the new government in Moldova. We have to come to terms how we deblock this situation, especially in the reforms of the judicial sector and the fight against corruption. I would like for the introduction, to give you more insight into the problems I'm observing in the European Union for this final goal to make the countries in the Eastern neighborhood real part of the European Union of the future. So the European Union is, as a system, not so old. So sometimes from the outside, it feels as something which is already very stable and has a very long tradition. So the whole project of European integration started in the very west of the European Union only 65 years before today. And so 65 years is not eternity. What we have achieved so far as European Union, I think, is really something very big and very unique in political history, which we can overlook today. It's not a hidden story that this European Union today has more problems inside than we expected. So we expected us to have 10 years ago. When I became a member of the European Parliament in 2004, this was the time, the period of huge enthusiasm about the new era of this European Union. This enlargement towards the east. That many countries from the east and the southeast of the European continent, so you would say from the center of the European continent, and you are more right, but for us in 2004 it felt very much the east. So this enlargement came along with a huge enthusiasm. This was 2004. 6 months or one year after I became a member of the European Parliament, this enthusiasm was threatened for the first time. We lost the idea of the European Convention, the European Constitution. In spite of a long preparation process in a convention, in 2 countries, in the Netherlands and in France, those people who had this huge enthusiasm about the new era of Europe, they were really defeated in referenda. And I have to admit that I myself was shocked when I understood during campaigning in the Netherlands in 2004 that when I understood that so this defeat in the Netherlands especially was because of a certain mistrust towards the East. So the citizens of the Netherlands mainly voted against the constitution because they disagreed with the enlargement. For them, so beyond Berlin was unknown country, and they even did not want to become familiar with this unknown country. So we muddled through, so we made some compromises, as Europeans normally do, in their political processes, in a huge effort, and it's important to remember this, mainly managed by Angela Merkel. There was a compromise, and instead of the common constitution, we agreed on the Lisbon Treaty. Having achieved that, the euro became a very problematic project, the common currency. So the crisis of the common currency, our common money, the euro, started in 2008. So the reasons behind this crisis are diverse, but it's very, very important to understand that since 2008, the European member states have been very, very much concentrated on this crisis and in this whole process of solidarity, lack of solidarity, too much solidarity, we discovered, I discovered, so that the gaps which existed always in the European Union, that those gaps are deepening. So the gap in between the north of European Union and the south, so the understanding on how a country should be run, and also the understanding of for what the state is responsible, for what the citizens are responsible, what is the relation in between the citizens and the state. So this very different understanding of the North and the South deepened this gap in between the North and the South. Greece, from my point of view, is only a symbol for this gap in between the North and the South of the European Union. And in the same time, we discovered that also the East is still a bit more away from Brussels than we thought. And for me, one of the very, very important moments when I discovered this was that so during the heavy fights to keep Greece in the Euro and in the European Union, the Greeks started to make so the common policies towards Putin a problem, and they started to discuss alliances with Putin to achieve a better standing towards Brussels or Berlin or whomever in their own crisis. So I will not go to the details, but in this in this situation with Greece, the East, the newcomers in the European Union, they made very much their case that they went through very, very demanding adaptation programs, so transformation programs. You can also say, like the Greeks always say, austerity programs, and that their income, average income, that their average pensions, etc., is still far behind the Greek average income or the Greek average pension, and that they, especially facing then the new alliances in between the Syriza government in Greece and Russia, that they would be not very willing to go and follow all the demands by the Greeks in this crisis. In the end, we always found solutions, but as I said, the gaps in between the North and the South, existing since ever in the European Union, and the gap in between the East and the rest of the European Union, or the East and the West and the East and the South. So those gaps are real problems. We will see during the next months, we will see in the European Union two very, very important votes. Those votes will be on membership of the UK, the United Kingdom, in the European Union, and on the association agreement with Ukraine in the Netherlands. I would say this vote in the Netherlands is also about the European Union as such, even being labeled as a vote on the association agreement with Ukraine. They wanted, so this populist group behind the referendum, they wanted to have a vote on the European Union. They could not achieve it, and then they started to think about using the association agreement as a tool to attack the European Union. I don't know the outcome of this, but so you can see that the situation of the European Union, maybe for you from the outside, it's always looking very nice and much brighter than the situation in your countries. But so the situation inside the European Union is much less stable than I want it to be. And this has many reasons. We can discuss it, why I mention this. So the nationalist parties gaining ground in many of the member states of the European Union the uncertainties many citizens feel towards Brussels, because they do not really understand Brussels. They fear it's too far away from them. And the global problems which so the European Union and all our member states together are facing meanwhile. So those global problems like the refugee crisis during the last year, the new threats because of a new strategy in the Kremlin, the war and destabilization of the Middle East, Near and the Middle East. So all this creates kind of a climate of anxiety and fears. And this is never ever the climate to achieve a lot of progress, so with supranational steps. I think it's wrong. It should be different, especially those challenges would be better, easier and more successful to be tackled if we would look for our supranational European united strength and force, but the climate in most of the member states is right now against this. And so how to make progress for the countries still outside of the European Union, and facing the threats, for example, by the Kremlin much more direct than those countries inside of the European Union. This is very often forgotten, and I'm among those who are always talking also in the European Union about this, so that there is still the problem with Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia. So there's now this fence and the real border organization, so it's different compared to Donbass, but it's not a good situation. So on Donbass, so many of you will probably know more details. I have been in Slavyansk and Artyomovsk several times during the last year, and I have good relations into the region in the east of Ukraine. It's still a hot conflict. It's not a frozen conflict, it's a hot conflict. And on Transnistria, so I have to admit that my visit during only some weeks ago, I had the impression it could become very fast again a very hot conflict and develop away from what we have now as a so-called frozen conflict. I'm not sure. But so even in this situation, what the European citizens need, as the citizens of the three countries, what we need to achieve more progress in this process coming closer together is progress in the reforms of the countries, the basic reforms, so true democratic states based on the rule of law, transparency, and everything most of the people I know from those countries want for the future for their countries. I think this is what I wanted to say to introduce the discussion, because I'm convinced that it's very, very important to have a true picture in this processes of coming closer from both sides. And so I don't want nobody to be disappointed on the European Union. The European Union is a success story, but it's also a very demanding project which is right now in some problems. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Ria. Thanks, Ria. Moving to an interactive part. I call upon you to seize the opportunity and think of good questions. Meanwhile, to kick off our talk, I'll ask a question related to the topic of our discussion. Last month, the European Parliament adopted a resolution on the association agreements with Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. And the document reads that the association agreements, the implementations of the agreements, and I quote, must be a top priority for the EU. So my question is, why is it a top priority, and why do the members of the European Parliament stand for the close integration with these three states? Is it mostly about transfer of European values to the eastern neighborhood, or is it more about geopolitical reasons and a matter of principle for the EU?
I'm convinced, the fundament behind this idea of the association agreements is still the same fundament than what we had as the main idea of the founding fathers of the European Union, which was not called European Union in the 50s when they started. But the main idea behind this is that this continent, which faced 30 years of war, which faced Holocaust, which faced all the threats and horrors later on in parallel and later in Stalinism, and so everything you can imagine what is awful happened to this continent, and the idea how to really overcome the horrors from the last century, the idea is that the nations of this continent will do better in the future if they come out of their national containers, if they don't go to fight for their national interests, but if they follow the idea that if they take care of their interests together, they are doing better and they might achieve peace, stability, and democracy. For the west of the European Union, it worked well. I'm convinced, as I also followed closely the developments in Poland before the 90s, that part of the success of Solidarność, for example, was really based in the idea that they would like to join this European idea of the founding fathers and wanted to become part of this European Union or European project. And especially since 1989 and the early 90s, so since the collapse of the Berlin Wall and then the collapse of the Iron Curtain, which separated the whole continent, since then I was optimist that this process would continue, and so more or less stepwise. So during the colored revolutions in the east, in the eastern neighborhood, but especially also during Euromaidan, I found exactly what I thought, that we are still in the process of following the ideas of the founding fathers of European Union. And for me, so the citizens of this continent all should have the right to join, and especially also have the right to get the support by the European Union in their struggles for freedom, democracy, and the rule of law.
One of the topics of the journalism school is Russian propaganda, and I wonder how the European Union can assist to the Eastern Partnership states to cope with so-called Russian occupation on information front. I know that last year the European Union launched an interesting initiative, so-called Stratcom task force, sort of department to counter Russian propaganda. But what exact instruments can the EU employ to assist the Eastern Partnership states accept this initiative?
So I think the main problem of this weaponization of information, yeah, I like very much this formula found by Peter Pomerantsev and Michael Weiss. So the main problem for the European Union is that so with this kind of propaganda organized by the Kremlin and many media, they organized around their ideas. The Kremlin organized around the Kremlin's ideas. The main problem in the European Union is in the Western countries of the European Union. They have no real idea, especially also the citizens have no real idea about the risks of this propaganda. They even they don't understand that, for example, Russia Today or Raptly or Sputnik, that these are propaganda tools. And this is because there is a lack of understanding of former Soviet Union and how it was organized. And there is a lack of understanding, especially also that meanwhile, so the KGB is running the Kremlin and is running also the propaganda media. So for the average citizens, and this is the real risk for our societies, very often Russia Today or Raptly feels the same source of information like German First Channel, BBC, etc., etc. In some parts of our member states, we even face a situation that people and citizens call the media, so the state media, for example, or public media, they call them Lügen media, so media to spread lies, yeah? And they say Raptly is doing much better because they are coming up with hidden stories the Western media don't want to show. And this, so incapacity to understand this kind of propaganda is, I think, so far the fundament of Russian success in the Western public. Ukraine already paid a high price for this because there are many spoiling so-called informations on Ukraine entering into the public discussions of Western states, Western European states via Raptly, via Sputnik, or also via all those activities from the Troll factory, for example, in St. Petersburg. The instruments we decided after long debates, and I must say after 2 long debates, the instruments are partly fine. Especially, so we have this department on Stratcom, so strategic communication. So in the responsibility of Mrs. Mogherini in the European Commission, we have a close cooperation with independent media, for example, in Ukraine, but also in other countries in our neighborhood. Hromadske television, for example, is something which is also supported by Stratcom and other possibilities, because we decided, and I know it sounds weak, but I think it's a good idea, that we can beat the propaganda not only by propaganda from the other side, but we can beat propaganda only by well-done journalism and good information.
Do you have questions so far? Should I pass the mic? Okay, I wonder, just a moment, I wonder if there's a political will in the European Union to increase financial assistance to association countries to develop its media to counteract propaganda. Did you discuss it in the Parliament?
So, I think so. To only support media would not help, because so the media system in the countries we are talking about is a problem. So I have most experiences with Ukrainian media, and I started to work on the reform of the media system in Ukraine after the Orange Revolution in 2004. Still, it's for me a major problem that oligarchs own big media, very influential media, that politicians own media. I think so everybody knows how awful it was for Italy and the political development that Berlusconi, the Prime Minister of Italy, owned big media. So everybody who understands this knows that it's not good that Mr. Poroshenko is too close to big and influential media. It's it's insane for a democratic system. So we should not support this system. We should develop this system to a well-functioning media system with also no state channels, but public channels. This is all known, for example, in Kiev. It's also known in Chisinau. But if you look to, it's also in Georgia. If you look to the capitals, those who are in control of the media, they do everything to keep their control. Sometimes they are hiding behind some straw persons, but they are still, they know why they are doing it. And one of the battles the European institutions should take in a much more profiled way should be about independent and pluralistic media sectors, because so democracy without independent media and without public media system, democratic development will be very, very difficult to be achieved. What we should support are really those new media outlets which are growing also in those countries, and they really need support. But in the same time, we should also not make those new media like Hromadske or Ukrainska Pravda, we should not make them the tools of the European Commission.
Hello, I'm here, with that, yeah. My name is Katya Machin, nice to meet you. So my question is, are there some economic challenges to European Union because of the association with Ukraine, Georgia and Moldova? And if there are some states are influenced economically more than the others?
I don't know whether I really understood. What is your question?
Okay, I asked you if there are some economic challenges for European Union because of the association with Ukraine, Georgia and Moldova. And do some states suffer more than the others?
So we are discussing in the European Union right now again and again, and probably until summer, the impact on our economies because of the sanctions, the economic sanctions we agreed on after annexation of Crimea and after the war in Donbass started. So there are consequences, direct consequences, but they are not as severe as many people pretend. And in the same time, all the European countries, for example, have some benefits from the very, very low oil price. So this is, I think, overall, very much balancing the negative impact which we could see for some branches because of the sanctions. So the engagement, the financial engagement which the European member states took towards the three association countries, I think those engagement, they are more than justified, because by investing into the development, economic development, but also democratic development in those countries, we are also achieving benefits. And I think the more problems for social and economic development, not only negative, but the bigger challenges based on the association agreements will be with the three countries, not in the European Union. So if it goes well, we will all benefit from it, but there will be also problems. If you discuss today with Polish citizens, for example, why they voted this strange Kaczynski party to power again. Many of the Polish citizens won't tell you that they definitely like Kaczynski's way of organizing the state. But what they have been given to me, mainly as arguments in discussions since Duda and Szydło came to power, was a huge disappointment on the social development in Poland, and that after very much engagement in the transformation process, in the end many people were disappointed on a stuck situation for social development. But overall, I think still in Poland, the situation is much better than 10 years ago. If you go to Polish universities, if you go to Polish companies, if you visit the Polish cities, so in many parts of the country, I would say you cannot recognize this country as the old country. It really developed well, and that Tusk and others did not manage to organize the social justice in a good way should not prevent Poland from following the way they started to develop their country 10 years ago.
Hi, my name is Anastasia Czuprinska. I want to ask you, are you familiar with this term Brexit in the United Kingdom? They have some moods about leaving the EU. And how do you think these moods inside the country, how dangerous they are? And how do you plan to deal with this?
About
Brexit. Britain, Africa.
It's a vote of the UK citizens, which has been in discussion since several years. That it now happens. So we will see. I'm not sure. I think it's a very tense situation, and the camps. You cannot right now. You cannot really judge the outcome. It will also depend from the development in the European Union. So June is still a way to go. We are only in February, and so the events in the European Union, looking back, the last year, so those events they come sometimes very sudden, and so the the whole development in the European Union might be of also some importance which is not yet visible for the vote of the citizens. And so when I saw yesterday evening the news that so Greece called back its ambassador from Vienna, from Austria, I must say I was shocked. This is only little news maybe from the outside, but so this has not happened in the European Union ever before. Yeah? And this is part of the refugee crisis and the Schengen crisis. So for the citizens, I hope that it's not a vote on the deal, because for me it feels very, very poor, yeah, in the year 2016 to judge the membership in the European Union only based on this little deal Cameron achieved with Tusk and the European Council, because it's really, so compared to the achievements, the common achievements, it's not something very big. And so again, what I said in the beginning, so facing the war in Syria, and nobody can predict how this develops. So especially those who know Putin, or Russia, the Kremlin, so from the close, or in a closer situation, they know that it's unpredictable right now. Yeah? Nobody knows how the Kremlin strategy will develop in Ukraine, or in Georgia, or in the eastern neighborhood. We have other nicer challenges, but it sounds only nicer. Global warming, the refugee crisis, which is more or less a global crisis. Yeah? Facing this, how could UK citizens decide to return to their national container? So I'm not sure how it ends. My Green Party finally agreed in the UK to not put any conditions, but to really fight in favor of the yes camp, the stronger in camp, and we will see how it develops.
I'm here. You have mentioned about Greek crisis, while we're talking about some misunderstanding in EU within the members, and I want to mention about other cornerstone is refugee crisis, where Eastern EU members have a great consolidation in their opposition to the Brussels. Don't you think that it might be a great threat for Brussels and EU as a whole, as a system, such unity in opposition from East? Thank you.
There are not only problems with the Visegrad countries. They are always mentioned as the refusers, yeah, in the refugee crisis. But so the true picture is different. So beside Sweden, a bit the Benelux countries, Germany and Austria, only Ireland and Portugal really, and the Baltics meanwhile, some of the Baltics, really offered to take on board parts of the refugees arriving in the European Union. And so France, for example, as a big and strong country, or UK, they are also not in true solidarity mood so far. And I therefore found it extremely unfair that the clear positioning of the Polish, for example, was the only focus of German media for a long time. So I'm well aware that Greece, Italy, and also this little island Malta, and in former years also Spain, they took already a huge part of the burdens and the challenges during the beginning of the refugee crisis. So they are, in a way, not to be judged. But we have to come to a common solution in this, and the East and the West of the European Union, they have to play their role. I'm not convinced that we will see all the countries taking on board the same portion or quota of refugees as Germany or Austria did during the last year, but they have to take some. What I'm expecting them is to come to a compromise in the European Union with shared responsibility in different fields, because we have not only to take on board into our countries more refugees, especially from war regions. We have to invest much more in refugee infrastructure outside of the European Union, in the regions of crisis, in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Turkey, as is already in discussion. We have to invest together in proper management of our external borders. We have to decide on how to manage the refugee influx in the European Union, and we have to do this based also on a good distribution system in the European Union. So different countries can play different roles in this compromise, and I expect the Visegrad countries to play a role. When they are not inviting the people, then they can take their responsibility in other parts of a possible compromise. And Merkel, for example, Chancellor Merkel is very much preparing such a compromise. What Austria did with the Balkan countries was a very, very heavy new burden against achievement of such a compromise. So you see also in the EU, we are not always doing well.
I invite you to focus on the EU's Eastern policy in your questions.
But it's part of connected, it's part of the dialogue. So this is a question with all the problems in your labs in the EU. I was just thinking, is there any kind of plan A or B for Russia's reaction? You know how Russia is using situations when a country is sort of engaged in long debates and discussions, that Russia acts. Have you got some kind of plan with all our countries waiting at your doorstep with our own problems? You developing the union for 50 years and still in doubt or somehow, okay, let's put it, facing problems, and Russia at your doorsteps, right? Is there any kind of plan, clear plan?
I think what was a good development in the European Union, a good phase, was that so since the escalation in Ukraine started, but it was there the European reaction was weaker, I would say, but also I would say Saakashvili, meanwhile, in kind of Ukrainian leader, yeah, but Saakashvili also made some mistakes in Georgia, which contributed to bigger problems also on the European side. Yeah. But it's another issue. But so since Putin decided to tackle clearly the European Union and the unity of the European Union by destabilizing Ukraine, because they wanted the association agreement and they got it. Since this happened, the unity against the Kremlin strategy became stronger. So the EU never was ready, as also the United States never were ready to go to war with Russia, but they decided that only united they can reply. And the sanctions and so also a different way of diplomacy has been the first common answer to a challenge from the outside, which we achieved faster. So all other decisions during the last years or during the last decade took much longer. So this is, I would say, a good thing. Plan B, so if we fail, so we will discuss what to do. But I think the most important thing now towards Russia is to keep this unity and to go not into the trap of Russia, trying to again activate the old ideas of German Ostpolitik, that having good economic relations will deliver peaceful and good neighborhood situation with Russia. And also, what I would say is very, very important for the European Unions when it comes to our neighbors, which are situated in between the more aggressive Russia or the more aggressive Kremlin and us, we have to keep our responsibility for the processes we started together with the countries in our neighborhood. And we should not, because those processes of transformation are as problematic, as difficult, and sometimes as ugly as they are, we should not use this as an excuse to escape our responsibility. And then I think this is probably the most important answer towards Russia.
Good afternoon. Sorry. Good afternoon. I have been asked to ask you 2 questions. They're connected with gender equality, so if you don't mind, I will read them. The first is the situation of gender equality in the European Union isn't stable these days. Some were better, some were worse. In your opinion, is there a reason for this in personal mentality? Does it prevent Europeans to reach this level of gender equality as it is in Sweden?
So I think the best gender equality is achieved meanwhile in Norway, outside of the European Union, but still in Europe. And the Norwegians were the first nation, were the first to decide on a binding quota system for women's, not only in political parties, so based on this also in parliament, but also in private enterprises. In the European Union, we have since decades the battle on this quota system, and stepwise, we achieve to make those rules for involvement of women. We make this stepwise. We achieve to make those rules more binding. So there's still a long way to go. If you look, for example, into the European Council, when they met last weekend and decided on the deal with Cameron, out of 28 heads of states, only 3 are women. And it's also interesting, so Merkel is German, but all the 3 women have their roots, they come from the East. So if you include Merkel coming from former GDR, so this shows something about also the East and the West, and I like also that sometimes the progress comes from the East and not from the West. We have, for example, some political parties in Europe which have binding quota systems, 50-50, women and men. My party, for example, the Green Party, has this binding quota regime, And therefore, we have many successful and very influential female politicians all over the different levels of political responsibility for the party.
Thank you. And the second one.
It's true.
Thank you.
Sorry.
The second is, to what extent is improvement of gender equality in our country important for Ukrainians' European integration? And can you please give some advices for improving the situation of gender equality in Ukraine?
So what I see is that meanwhile there are some more women in the Ukrainian parliament than in 1993, when I first time was visiting or 94, I think was my first visit in parliament. But it can still be improved. And so I, for example, was happy that when the group of activists from Euromaidan really also decided not only to push their men into politics, but also pushed some of the women from Euromaidan into politics. I'm also always glad to see that when I'm meeting the reanimation package for reforms, that many women are very active for this group. I'm, for example, since very long time in contact with Bankwatch, an NGO working in the energy field in Ukraine, and also there, meanwhile, in leading positions, I see women. This is interesting because they are working mainly on the energy sector, and energy sector is one of those sectors of industry where you find normally only men. So it's, I think, a good development, and especially those NGOs and civil society organizations are very much in the hands of women, and I think it's something which all of us should support. When I'm advocating in Brussels the interest of Ukraine, I never forget to mention that women in Ukraine need support.
Hello, my name is Diana. Do you agree that Ukraine, first of all, should fortify its internal market before joining the different trading organizations and unions? And what would you suggest Ukraine about fortifying internal market?
So right now, I think the progress, what I think is the most important progress, comes very much combined to the conditions of the association agreement. And I think for the development of Ukrainian economy, it's very important that you achieve the progress demand for a fight against corruption, that liberalization does not mean in the end again that you strengthen only the strong players in economy of Ukraine. I'm very much aware of the fact that former privatization waves in Ukraine were the roots of the oligarch system. And what we are now going to see as next steps of privatization should not again strengthen those old structures. Therefore, transparency rules, good tenders, and so a good level playing field for different participants of economy in Ukraine is very important, and I think it was a good signal that Mr. Abramavicius left his position or wanted to leave his position and gave the strong signal that if those blocked reforms are not deblocked, if the whole judiciary and especially the office of the prosecutor general is not reformed, then the privatization wave to come in this new wave again the citizens of Ukraine, but also the small and medium-sized enterprises will be the losers. And I'm very glad that in this period, so for the first time, the international supporters, be it IMF, be it the European Union, be it the EBRD, be it our representations in Kiev, so the ambassadors, they all said, so boys, yeah, to Yatsenyuk and to Poroshenko, stop it, so come to the reforms, be serious, otherwise so the payments you need from our side will not come.
Hello. To continue gender equality topic, Georgia has just refused quota system for women, Georgia's parliament. I want to ask you whether this quota system really changes something in any country's politics or not. Quota system. Yeah, I mean, we just refused this quota system, Georgia just refused. I want to ask your opinion whether this quota system changed something or not.
And what exactly?
Yeah,
And what
in the
parliament? Yes, they refused.
But the quota system for women.
Yes.
Yeah, for women.
So the Georgian parliament and the Georgian government is probably not the only parliament and the only government in the world to refuse it. But so in my country, in Germany, we had, so when the Greens started in the 80s to establish this 50-50 quota for men and women, and in addition we decided that the leader of an electoral campaign also always has to be a woman. So we have always a duo, but so that in the first place we always put a woman. So when we decided this, everybody else from the political landscape was saying this is only producing quota women, Quotenfrauen. So this will never help so to really strengthen women, because it's only window dressing and the strong players will always be the men behind. They were wrong, yeah, I would say. Believe it or not, but maybe I'm also a bit an example for this failed quota system. But meanwhile, the political landscape has completely changed in Germany. All the political parties, meanwhile, established quota systems based on a strong fight of the women in those parties. And all the women, so the politicians who called me in early years, you are a quota woman, they meanwhile are glad to have those quota systems also in their parties. If you would ask Angela Merkel if she sees herself as product of a quota system, she will deny it. There was no quota system when Mr. Kohl has chosen her. So from the newcomers from east of Germany, but many of the young women in other political parties in Germany who are now very successful also, they will also be witnesses for the fact that without a quota system they would never have managed, because the networks of the boys, and this is also partly the problem of women, the networks of the boys normally function much better.
Good afternoon. My name is Roman and I'm from Moldova. You mentioned our current new government, and I'm very interested in your opinion on the current Moldavian process, because some of the protesters are pro-European, and they believe that current government is more threat to the European future of Moldova than pro-Russian forces in Moldova. Thank you.
So I have to admit my recent visit to Moldova was kind of shock therapy. I read over the last 2 years only the reports on Moldova, and I wondered why the European forces working in the EU representatives working in Moldova always presented Moldova as the true success story among the 3 countries with meanwhile association agreements, because I found a very bad situation. However you try to judge the democratic situation in Moldova, whether you judge the media system, whether you judge the independence of the state institutions, whether you judge the influence of oligarchs on politicians, whether you judge the independence of the judiciary and wonder whether there is selective justice or not. So you come to a negative judgment. Yeah? And so I think if the European Union is in Moldova identified as a union backing selective justice, backing an oligarch system, backing that at least parts of the state's institutions are captured by oligarchs. So if we are seen as European Union tolerating this, then we are in a big mess. Yeah? And I think it's not yet too late, but so this government, as it has been established, the process of the establishment of the government is unacceptable, and I don't know how, but based hopefully on a better electoral law, there should be new elections in Moldova. I can't imagine that without proper elections, the mistrust of citizens in Moldova can be overcome. And so that there are people in Moldova who are campaigning more close relations again to Russia should not hinder us from really working for a democratic process. But I find it very worrying that for a long time in the European Union we had no proper judgment of the situation in Moldova.
We are running out of time. I hope we can make public parts a bit longer. Let's have say 2 more questions and then move on to the form of organization.
Hello. I want to ask you, politics in Kiev are talking a lot about Ukraine being not only in association with the European Union, but also being a member in the European Union. As I understand, that would be a major economical challenge for you if we judge by how Ukraine is now. So the question is, does the European Union want Ukraine as a member or only as an external partner, and why? Thank you.
I myself and some of my colleagues, we want since long Ukraine and others on the way to membership, but Ukraine, like the other countries, are far away from being able to be members of the European Union. And this is self-explaining, I would say, facing the actual situation. In addition, the European Union right now is not in form to accept new members. And so what I tried to explain in the very beginning maybe needs some deepening, but since 2004, so the transformation of the countries from the center and the southeast of the continent was not only a success story. So yesterday I discussed with representatives of this new movement for democracy in Poland, KOT. And those representatives of the movement, they are organizing today their protests again in Warsaw. But those representatives, they explained to me that Poland is still learning some basics of democracy and some basic rules of democracy, and that they feel themselves still also as now a protest movement, that they feel themselves also part of this learning process. And this shows how difficult it is. In addition, for example, my own experiences during traveling to Greece in those years of Greek crisis, meanwhile lasting since 2008, showed me that even in Greece, and this is a long-standing member of the European Union, we are still also in a learning process, democracy learning process. Maybe it's typical also for democratic countries that it's again and again also about learning and development, but it's, as I said, a process which is also a bit destabilizing the European Union internally. So this is not against the idea of other countries becoming in the future members of the European Union, but it's very, very important to understand that it's a process which has to be achieved from two sides, from the European Union and from the countries in the neighborhood. I hope it will be a success story, but it requires patience, with the European Union, and from the other side with the neighboring countries, and also it requires a lot of patience inside in those countries in transformation. But also, it's to be honest, so Ukrainians wanted membership. They got association. Some are very disappointed on this. But to all of those, I would recommend go to Turkey. They got the promise of membership. They even got the opening of membership negotiations. Meanwhile, they are more far away from the European Union than Ukraine or Moldova.
Thank you. It's a question from Georgia. So I will try to continue speaking about difficulties on our way to you to be these success stories. I wanted to ask, how to deal with the needed painful reforms on our way to you. For instance, governments need unpopular decisions which are needed to be made on our way to you. For instance, we are working about a project which needs reformation of transport systems, which are very painful on the level of state and on the level of citizens. It's connected with a lot of costs, expenses, and so on. Are there any recommended solutions on that level? How to make it easier to achieve this? Or less painful?
So I think all those big transformations will require not only patience, but also people might feel that they are losing over a period. I saw this in all the Eastern European countries, but going, for example, meanwhile to Poland or to the Baltic countries, you can also see that it was worse to go through those years of painful changes. What I see as a missing frame right now, especially in Ukraine, but I experienced the same a bit in my meetings with citizens in Moldova, is that the political elite and also the elite organized around the oligarchs, that they contribute to those painful years. And I think for a society it's very, very difficult to accept the years of lows, of lower income, of lower pensions, of paying more for energy, paying more taxes, etc., compared also to what you get. To accept all this while facing that corruption on the high level continues. So therefore, I think this whole debate on corruption and how to overcome it is kind of very, very important condition for citizens also to accept their burdens. If only the little people take the burdens, I don't know whether it can be successful. And so for conditions, I followed closely the discussions in the Rada on some of the reform steps, and so I think that so as long as, and this should be negotiated with the Europeans and also with the IMF, as long as this state is not able to pay decent income to civil servants, to then also judges, so like they did it with the police, with the new police. As long as also this state is not able to pay decent income to the politicians, and for example to mayors in cities or in communities, then it will be very, very difficult to overcome also this horizontal corruption. And so rent seeking is a disease for a parliament. And if we want to be successful in the reform process and in the fight against corruption, we have to kill the oligarch system, but we have also to create circumstances in the institutions which allow the people to say goodbye to any rent-seeking and little corruption. I read good stories about Odessa. So, for example, about the custom services and what they are doing there. So it's feasible. It's feasible, but I think it deserves much more attention. And I was when Mustafa Nayyem, I think already 1 year ago or earlier last year, came out with his big request: pay your politicians. Ukrainians, you must pay your politicians. I was very disappointed that the public reaction was, those politicians, they are anyway not useful for us. I think it's a complete wrong attitude, and I hate the idea that Mustafa and others, that they have to travel around the world and to give lectures, to have some income, to be able to do their job at home without being paid by oligarchs. So something has to be changed fundamentally around the idea of the functioning of your institutions.
Hi, my name is Tudor. I'm from Moldova. Have European Union a plan for the next parliamentary elections in Moldova? Because pro-Russia political parties are very popular now.
So I met also all those representatives of the opposition in Moldova, and yes, some feel to be close to Russia. So it's fact, yeah? They are now part of Moldova. I think their existence should not prevent us from preparing a fair democratic election, and should not stop us from discussing the lack of transparency and democratic processes behind the existing government. And so the argument that there are pro-Russian parties is not enough as an argument against a new democratic process. I was a bit astonished that the leader of one of the parties, he's a mayor from one of the smaller cities in Moldova. Give me his name. I forgot the name right now. Yeah, Zatov. Yes. That he said that he made very clear that they are going to decide when the protests will continue and when they will stop. The representatives of civil society were not so clear on this, but even facing this, so the problems of the new government and the problems of the pro-European parties, they are real problems, and Russia is not enough as an argument, and Russian interest is not enough as an argument for the Europeans not also to fight corruption in the political system of Moldova.
My name is Juliana. I'm here. I'm Kyiv Post journalist from Kyiv. My question goes towards public control of reforms. In Ukraine, we created a community of watchdogs, mainly journalists, investigators, who control the reforms, who control mainly oligarchs in terms of corruption. So my question is, what else we can do in order to be a next successful story, not only like to be a member just of European Union, but only to overcome corruption and to be proud of our country.
I think you should simply continue what you are doing and to be those watchdogs. And I think what is also very necessary, according to some of the reports I'm getting from Kiev and from other places, is so if you are threatened for what you are doing as watchdogs, talk about it and talk to your colleagues, and don't give in to those who are trying to threaten you. Because this is obviously part of all those difficult processes of change and transformation. Those who are speaking publicly about the problems of corruption, the problems of oligarch system, rent seeking and protection in the system, they face threats. And the only way to stand in this is to speak about it and to be united with those who are doing especially the very difficult jobs of independent journalists in those days. Okay, and I know about what I'm talking because sometimes I'm also targeted.
And the last question. Hello, my name is Roman. I want to change a little the topic and to turn to the history. Maybe you remember the year 2008, yes? and Bucharest summit of NATO. And Ukraine and Georgia then had to get the agreement with NATO, as called MAP, yes, another kind of association. And this agreement there was blocked by Germany also. And in half year we had already war in Georgia. And how do you think, were there any objective reasons for this agreement to be blocked or not? And if not, no objective reasons, is now Germany and NATO at all a little responsible for next 2 wars in Eastern Europe or not? How do you think? Thank you.
As far as I remember Ukraine in 2008, I don't know the polls from Georgia, but as far as I remember Ukraine from 2008, also even in Ukraine, among the citizens, the situation was far away from having a majority in favor of NATO membership. This changed in Ukraine only since annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass. So having said that, I will not forget about the situation in NATO. In the NATO there was never a serious decision close to have Georgia and Ukraine or other countries in the eastern neighborhood of EU as members, as NATO members. Whatsoever Mr. McCain or others are saying, I'm 100% sure there was not only a veto by Germany, that there was never a majority to do this step. But the West was very naive. They thought if they refuse explicitly NATO membership to Georgia, they would stop any kind of imperialism by Russia. This was wrong, this was naive. In the same time, I would say, and I don't know Georgia, so I'm following Georgia, but I have to go there. I really want to go there, and yeah, we have to get organized. Yeah. But so as I see it in Ukraine, and this is very painful, not only for me but also for Ukrainians, that it was possible for Russia, yeah, to get so this foot, yeah, into the neighboring countries again. This was also because some big political mistakes committed in Tbilisi and in Kiev. I know Donbass since long. I visited Artyomovsk first time, I think, in 1999, and have some good friends in the very east of Ukraine since long. And so that nobody ever really took care about the citizens and their beings. The miners, for example, in the east of Ukraine, made it easier for Russia to have a foot in the door. So it's not only the failure of NATO or EU or US what happened, also some of the very much oriented, very much oligarch-oriented politics in Georgia and in Kiev over the last 20 years enabled Russia to do what they did.
We thank Rebecca Harms for finding time to meet us. We will still have some time to talk informally before Rebecca leaves. Thanks a lot.
Андрей, поможешь? Окей. Ребекка, Андрей переведет. Я хотел
трижды вам сказать спасибо. Андрей, ты можешь? Микрофон. Да. Я хотел трижды вам сказать спасибо, да?
I appreciate that you came so much.
Первый раз за то, что вы приехали. Не надо учить язык, это правда уже. Да, первый раз за то, что вы к нам приехали, потому что вы дали нам ощущение, что у нас все-таки школа международной журналистики. И ощущение того, что мы попытались понять, какой сегодня является европейская геополитика касательно наших трех стран. Это важно, это первое мое спасибо. Второе мое спасибо за Майдан. И когда мы думали, что оставить вам на память от визита во Львов, то мы думали, что лучшей памятью будет книга о Майдане, потому что вы тоже стали частью истории о Майдане. Это было второе спасибо. И, Ребекка, третье спасибо от Украинского католического университета. Мы рады всегда будем видеть у нас в гостях людей, которые являются друзьями Украины. И спасибо вам за поддержку. Спасибо.